Hey everyone. Today I'm interviewing an old friend of mine, Michael Haynes. We studied together at Curtin and became good friends. And sort of since then, he's taken quite a few different interesting roles within the planning sphere. But like myself, he's never actually been an official planner, but he has done a lot of planning, if you could say that. So I'll pass you over to Mike and let you talk. He'll tell you a little bit about himself, and then we'll learn about what kind of place activation stuff he's been up to.
Thank you, Barnaby. Yeah, really nice to be speaking with you all today. I was a Curtin student as well, graduated in 2013. So it's nice to full circle the story and to contribute what I've learned in the last 8 or 9 years and to help share what's been happening in the placemaking world and how the evolution of planning is starting to take a bit more of an active, on the ground, engaged role as compared to what we probably typically think about as a planner, which is sitting in desk doing statutory and strategic planning. We're at a real point now where we can begin to employ and understand our skills into a more on the ground, here and now approach. So it's really nice having you all. I'm going to start sharing my screen. I've got a quick little presentation to indicate some of the big ideas that are floating around in my world at the moment, hopefully giving you a bit of context about where I've come from and how I've got to this place, and then starting to think of how I'm using these skills that I learned through my planning degree and my subsequent education into being a really pragmatic and flexible and useful planner in the modern world. So if you'll just give me a second, I'll get my screen share going. Yeah, so g'day. So yeah, my name's Michael Haynes. I'm the director and principal consultant of FutureCommon. FutureCommon's a company I started back in 2014. What was that, about 6 or 7 months after I graduated university, really recognizing this emerging field of placemaking and how exciting and vibrant it is. So at the moment, I'm here in Hobart in Tasmania, and I moved to Tasmania about 5 years ago, and starting to really start to get some real runs on the board toward placemaking over here. So I'll be sharing some of my experiences and some of my stories, and then how I'm using those skills going forward. So just a quick overview of what I'll be covering today. Obviously an acknowledgement to country, and we'll probably spend a little bit more time on that than we're used to. And once we get into that section 3 around the key place considerations, that's what I'm really hoping will contribute to your studies and all of the other conversations that you'll be doing throughout this course and your planning degree in general. As we get toward the end, I'll start raising some more open questions about how we can begin to think of place in the context of planning. And then I think we'll have a bit of a conversation, me and Barnaby, about some of the deeper insights and some of the things that I bring up and maybe how they're relevant to your course. So the acknowledgement of country. So I'm speaking to you here from Luatwitita of the Muanina people, which is down here in Hobart in Tasmania. And I'm speaking to you on Bilberman land from the Whadjuk Noongar people. Of course, really respect and acknowledge the contributions that those people have made to Australia over the last 50,000 plus years, and my profound respect for their culture, traditions, and approach. Moving beyond a tokenism toward this acknowledgement of country, I think it's really critical as place professionals that we go one step deeper toward understanding what country, what ritual and tradition means for the Aboriginal people, and how we can translate that back into our own work as place professionals, but also more openly as how we can begin to consider planning and planning for place. It's really this idea of learning what country means, that country is not a patriotic, nationalistic sense that we may hear like in the idea of Australia or the United States or Mexico or whatever. It's this real profound sense that the place has a spirit, and it's our job to try and capture, promote, foster, and grow what that spirit means. So really understanding country is a really critical step to understanding how we can use our skills to the maximum benefit for all people, and of course for the land and the traditions of this place. So as a quick introduction to me, so I've got a few like of the key things that I put on my elevator pitch. So I really focus on transport planning, as well as my place activation and placemaking. Transport planning is a really crucial part of understanding place, that movement of people is exactly where people come from and where they go next, and how they do that will really help determine and contribute to their story of their experience in a town or city, a place, whatever we may be talking about. After I left university, I continued my education. I did an applied design degree, focusing on user experience. So thinking of how the lessons that have been learned in the technological space and digital space can begin to be translated into a reality on the ground kind of experience, and really applying a lot of the same kind of lessons and techniques and tools. I engage a lot in philosophy, so constant questioning about why things are, why they got this way, and how we can appreciate those things and continue to move forward. I'm also an expert procrastinator. I try and put things off until the last possible moment, but I feel like that's probably something we all share in common. And I've got Homeful there, so I'm part of this story at the moment where I'm finding it really hard to find a place to move into in the housing crisis. But really relying on these different social positions and social connections that I have to continue me through. And I think that that's a really critical aspect of understanding what the advantages of building good places is, in particular around the idea of reinforcing social connections, reinforcing our sense of care for each other, as well as contributing to our broader communities. So here's a extremely chaotic and cluttered slide of all the things that I've done in my time since 2014. So in the top corner here, we've got some awesome festivals. I've done a lot of work with origami, had a shoe shine business where I was out on the streets. More recently here in Hobart, brought classical music to the streets of a working class suburb. Lots of work with disability and getting more people engaged in the story of placemaking. And as we can see on the right hand side, that's where my transport side really comes in, is working with bicycles and more recently with e-scooters. That's really this move towards sustainable cities, but also recognizing the place benefits of using these lighter, quieter, more human-friendly modes of transport, and obviously including pedestrians. Most recently, what I'm really excited about is I've just been employed as the outdoor dining coordinator for the city of Hobart. So it's going to be my job to go and talk with businesses, get them excited, and to start moving their business, moving their brand, their culture out into the public space. So more people in Hobart, whether they be locals or visitors, can really engage with those, with all the beauty of the great things that happen here. So moving into some of the key concepts that I think are really interesting to think about as a place and planning professional. So I've got three things that I want to discuss. And the first thing is place magnetism. So we understand with a magnet that a magnet can either push or pull, depending on the polarity of the magnet. This sense of push and pull is really critical to understanding what a place is existing, what the existing place is doing, whether it's actually trying to pull people into it or whether it's actively pushing people out. So we can think about that in a couple of different ways. So when we're thinking of pulls, we can think of things like shopping, we can think of things like dining and events, we can think of things like beautiful natural environments or places that make us feel calm, and generally things that really connect and appeal to our deep human emotions. When we're talking about the push, these can be things like incentive programs that actually are trying to get you into somewhere, or they can be more restrictive or exclusive. So ideas that we're developing around crime preventative urban design. Are we actually designing our places to have people stay there? We will see those like the non-skater and non like homeless people kind of barbs that go along seating and walls. So they're things that are trying to push you away. So as a place professional, it's our job to really understand those pushes and pulls, and to start thinking of how we can attune our magnets to providing the outcomes that we're looking to achieve, and becoming more aware of what those things are. So I think that's what's going to be really good through your coursework, through this unit, and ongoing through your planning is really understanding the push and pull of a town, of a place, whatever we may be talking about. So it's very similarly aligned, but something that's worth a bit more deeper inquiry is this idea of the duality of cities. And that might even be expanded into the duality of society. We're in the middle of an election campaign at the moment, so we're getting a lot of these kind of like quite noticeable dualities between left and right, Liberal, Labor, whatever those things may be. But as a planning professional, we have a real responsibility to go one step further, to understanding what the dualities that are in effect. Not saying that everything is black and white, most things are on a spectrum, but understanding those two sides of the coin is a really important way of getting a deeper understanding. So I've put up a few here just to give us some conversation pieces. So like conservative, progressive, order, chaos, built, natural, regulated, unregulated. So once we see these dualities or poles of the equation, we can begin to better understand where, you know, our local council is positioning itself, where a community is viewing its future and where it wants to proceed, but also in how a place is actually working, especially when we look at maybe the bottom four of the examples I've got on screen at the moment: structured and spontaneous. We probably know a whole bunch of things that pop into our mind when we think of that. Whereas structured is where it's almost like focused toward what you're supposed to do somewhere and how you're supposed to do it. And then the spontaneous is more just letting people go do what they want. And the built and the natural is probably pretty clear too. So where placemaking becomes really interesting is that we actually begin to manipulate these two polarities. And that's why it's important to begin to distinguish them. So as a place professional, we begin to use this kind of circular movement between those polar sides. So when we see somewhere that's natural, like let's say a national park, we might say, okay, well, maybe if we put a few things in here, a few built structures, we can really enhance the experience of that national park. That could be a visitor's center, it could be ecotourism, it could be walkways, and then we can begin to discover a new space of placemaking. But then also conversely, we may see something that's built and say it needs to be more natural. So we may see a town that's mostly paved, no street trees, not a lot of urban planting, everything's really hard, really cold, square corners everywhere. And as a placemaker, we might say we need to make this space more natural. So as a placemaker, it's almost our job to constantly be disrupting the status quo, not necessarily to erode the things that are beautiful and beneficial to that place, but to really challenge whether what is there is actually good enough to make a quality space. And what I like about thinking of the duality is we begin to become non-biased toward which side of a polar is better. So if going back to the national park example, we may have people just walking freely through the national park. And as they're doing that, they may be degrading the natural environment by walking or camping or whatever they may be doing. So we might say we need this space to be more structured. So we need to put in walkways, boardwalks, things that are going to protect that natural environment. But then conversely, we may actually want to take those things away if we're feeling the experience is too structured. So as a placemaker, we're constantly trying to recycle where a place is at. We're trying to constantly challenge what it's doing and how it's working. We're trying to find what it is, and we're trying to discover what it isn't and what it could be. That exploration and that journey toward discovery is really crucial, and where we get a lot of our momentum. It's where we get a lot of our ideas, and it's where we can generate excitement and our champions within the community to help make great outcomes happen. And the final point that I think is really critical, and I hope weaves into the previous 2 points, is this idea of the urban ecology. That once we begin to see cities as ecosystems, we begin to appreciate how they're working differently. Even as a planner in the broader industry that we sit, we fall into this built environment professional, and we might be bunched together with architects and developers and people in construction in that space. So that idea of being a built thing, that place is built, is a fundamental oversight or misstep toward understanding what places are and how cities work. So I tend to think of place and cities more as a garden. So in the same way that when you're preparing to develop a garden or rehabilitate a garden, you need to think of your fundamentals about what is going on there. So we need a really healthy, fertile soil. If we're working with a soil that's not fertile, we need to either introduce inputs to get it to that good spot. In a planning world, we might consider that water, electricity, sewage, those real fundamentals. Then we need to introduce the species. We could just do a homogeneous planting, all kangaroo paw, for example. But that creates a really fragile ecosystem, one that requires a lot more inputs, a lot more susceptible to disease, and likely to not attract in all the bugs and all the pollinators and all those things that is required for a healthy garden. And then there's also the aesthetic of your diverse species too. So thinking that when you've got more, it creates a thickness or a richness toward the garden that you're walking into. And when we feel we're walking into a rich and diverse garden, we get all different smells. We've got different colors stimulating our brain. And we find quite a little spots that suit our experience in that place. And then crucially, especially during the first 2 or 3 years of the establishment of a garden, you need to make sure that has got a lot of water and regular fertilization. And that's really where placemaking and place professionals come in. That we could like following the metaphor, we could probably think of water as funding and capital, like money to keep things happening, keep things circulating, keep the opportunities being able to be grasped. And the fertilizer is ideas, it's inspiration, it's new inputs, new characters, new organizations that can keep the fertility in the soil, and keep attracting those bugs and pollinators. And so continuing that as a placemaking professional, as someone who's trying to foster placemaking, as someone who's trying to recognize the value of space, we can really continue that idea of a metaphor, that a garden with more diversity, that's being looked after regularly, that's removing weeds as they appear, that may degrade or remove fertility from the soil, that usually leads to a more fertile, a more prosperous, and a more resilient garden. So using these ideas, it becomes really interesting when we're starting to see what we're doing. We begin to see things that lack diversity, that lack proper soil preparation, and probably extremely relevantly, that lack any water or fertilizer. So people plant the plants and then they just leave it and disappear. We see this in placemaking all the time, where someone's like, oh, we've got $100,000, so we'll do all this placemaking stuff. And they do that over 6 months, and then there's just nothing after that. So all of that effort to get the soil prepared to start putting in those plants just generally goes to waste, because the plants just wither and die, because they just don't have that regular watering and fertilization, which promotes the growth until those plants can find the groundwater and begin to sustain themselves. So I've got a couple of examples here especially of that previous slide of the urban ecology. So in the top left-hand side, we've got Yagan Square, which by all accounts has been a massive $75 million disaster. Really fell into that trap. The place is a built environment. We can see that everything was just so manufactured, so deliberate, so precise, that it almost begins to feel hostile or unwelcoming. With the, what do they call it, the market square or whatever they called it, where they had all the businesses. They used the built environment to wall that space off. So they stopped the plants being able to communicate with each other. Everything felt dislocated and disjointed. And now they're going to have to rip the whole thing up. In the bottom left-hand corner, we've got a fairly typical suburban district park, or district open space. We might see this as a very useful space, and I'm of course 100% for quality public open spaces. But when we look at this as a place professional, we see a real lack of diversity. We've got a few species of trees, and trees are great to have. We've got really well maintained grass, but there's no diversity within that. There's no spaces of commerce. There's nothing to buy anything from anywhere. There's no sense of where I'm supposed to sit or where I'm supposed to meet people. There's no public art. There's no attraction. There's no diverse plantings of actual plants, which mean that your biodiversity in this space is quite low. So although it's quite a useful, practical space for people that want to go play soccer on a Saturday afternoon, if you take your 4-year-old kid there, they're not going to know where to go because there's nothing for them to do. And so they're going to get bored really quickly in that, because there's not enough space for discovery. There's not enough space for like spontaneous and unstructured play. There's nowhere to be comfortable, right? There's no toilets, there's nowhere to get a drink, there's nowhere to get some lunch. So you're immediately limiting the amount of time someone's going to spend in this park to maybe 20 or 30 minutes before they become saturated in what that experience has to offer. When really we want people to be spending 3 or 4 hours at the park, letting their kids run around, sitting down, listening to some music, having a few nice drinks, playing frisbee with your friends. This idea of public space as being a real a meeting place for people. And then finally, in the bottom right-hand corner, we've got Sandy Bay, which is in Hobart, about 3 kilometres out of the CBD. So this all got constructed, this plan that we see down here back in 2016, cost $4 million to do this full streetscape upgrade. And again, they fell into the trap of overbuilding what the place was going to be. As we can see in this picture, everything is just paved, and it's not even attractive, an attempt to make it attractive. We've got a fairly narrow footpath that's full of clutter. So we've got a big problem over here at the moment, especially in Sandy Bay, with the e-scooters moving along the footpath, because they're just weaving and winding. People are walking out of shops straight into where the scooters are going. So we're having collisions. So that cost $4 million, and it's been an abject failure. So most of the businesses have shut down in Sandy Bay after this happened. It's just impossible for a food and beverage place to get started here. It's nigh on impossible to cross the road. As we can see from this diagram, if we're sitting where this guy is now, and we want to get to this pizza shop, La Bella, we have to go probably 100 meters up the road to find a safe crossing, because we've got 2 lanes of fast moving traffic, an unfriendly curb, and a very high intensity traffic flow. So with all of that money and time and energy spent to develop and build this plan, it's actually removed the economic activity from the community. It's separated the 2 sides of the streets from each other. And it removed biodiversity, even if it was not great biodiversity, because there was some palm trees that were in the middle of this road that were removed so that they could widen the road. So, you know, and $4 million, man, like for a placemaker, you could do 10 years of placemaking, no worries with that. And the place would just be thick with awesome things going on all the time. So as a planner, we really have to think of our value for money when we're doing these things. You know, a lot of the companies and the materials that we use to build this either came from interstate or they're from large corporate companies. So none of that money, none of that $4 million actually was injected back into the community. So therefore, the locals don't get any of the benefit from that money being spent, and they've actually been denied and removed access to their city. So as placemakers, this is what we're really trying to confront. And when we think of the duality, this Sandy Bay example is a really classic example where it was too structured. It was too organized. The priority was so clear that it was for enhancing traffic flow that everything else became a secondary consideration. And so as a placemaker, it's the way I look at this space as it is constructed now, is it's how am I going to make this more unstructured? How am I going to add more chaos to this order? How am I going to make this built space more natural? Whereas in the park example in the bottom left, it's like, how am I going to make this place more spontaneous? How am I going to make this natural space more built? How am I going to add more order to the chaos of a completely blank area? So it's this idea that as a placemaker, we're always trying to challenge what is, and trying to represent the other side. How can we be more ambitious in our parkland? How can we be more conservative in our built environment? And this idea of conservative can mean protecting vulnerable people, protecting business, protecting local culture and local values, which this road has diminished. So that's the general flow of a placemaker's thought process, and what we are constantly trying to encourage others to see as well. So moving on to the challenges of what a placemaker experiences. So the clear and almost too obvious one is a constrained and unimaginative bureaucracy. I like this idea. I like the word unimaginative in the idea of, especially when we're directing critique at our bureaucracy, because we understand that bureaucracies have to follow their policies, their plans, their structures, whatever they need to follow. But imagination is that process of just letting go of what we feel is like a bounding straitjacket of policy, and using our imagination to think of how those policies can be interpreted differently. How when we're doing policy reviews as planners, how we can open up the space for the bureaucracy's imagination through our choice of words, and also allowing the imagination of the community to be able to populate the space that they're trying to fill, and the bureaucracy being able to facilitate that. I mentioned before about this lack of funding, and the critical thing about place and place development is momentum. We spend so long working out who our community champions are, what those networks are, building quality, productive relationships with these people, and we deliver something amazing and special and different and fun. And then the next day, there's just nowhere to go. We don't know how to continue the conversations with those communities. So we really need to be thinking of placemaking as a program rather than an initiative. Yeah, and something you'll definitely experience if you move into any kind of planning, public administration space is community sentiment. It's a profound challenge, and something that, the more dictatorial minds would say, oh, we should just do it anyway, it doesn't matter what people say. But it's really our job to really hone in onto what that person's concern is. If someone's complaining about parking, maybe they're talking about access. If they're talking about their local character and not wanting to lose their local character, it's like maybe they're talking about protecting, the values of that place, not necessarily the built character and the built form. So, this is something I'm still learning as well. But a lot of it is actually just listening and really taking serious what the community feedback is saying. We should never dismiss any points of view, because it's coming from somewhere and it's probably true to some degree. And it's our job as, broad thinking, highly capable planners and urban thinkers to be able to read between the lines, find the subtext. Something we've got a big problem down here in Hobart with is a lack of outdoor culture. This idea that Hobart is cold and wet is super pervasive, and people just go home at 5:30 and they just don't go out again. So we've got really no vitality in the streets. So when we are doing our placemaking activities, we're finding people aren't engaging with them as much as we want them to. And we have to get real. That culture doesn't just shift because you've come up with a good idea. And that's the real benefit of finding the momentum of our place activities, that when we get momentum, people see that it's a thing. And once it becomes a thing, that's when they start to say, oh, we should go do that thing because I know it's happening and I know it's cool. But if it's just a one-off event and you don't, put as much Facebook ads or whatever you have to do to get people to things, then people just don't come up. People don't come. The people that are really going to find the benefit from placemaking activities aren't engaging with it. And an underdeveloped creative documentation and data acquisition. So when I say creative documentation, I mean like photographs, sketches, drawings, paintings, videos, TikToks, whatever. We need a huge amount more investment into capturing the moments and capturing the stories, the experiences, of what happens when we're doing placemaking. Because, you know, we might do a placemaking thing and all things going well, we might get 1,000 people coming along. But, you know, in a place like Hobart, we've got 220,000 people live in Hobart. So it's 219,000 people didn't see that thing. And they're probably the ones that want it in their own, for their own reasons, in their own ways. So it's really important that whenever we do any activity, that we bring along a photographer. Without the photographer, it's pretty much a waste of time. Because those things really matter. The power of a before and after photo is profound. When you've got a quiet, dark, dead alleyway, you get the photo of that, and then you fill it full of lights and public art and like pop-up music things or flash dances or whatever, and you get that before and after, and then people see the value, they see the change, and then continuing along that is data acquisitions. We really need to develop our surveying techniques about how we're capturing this information and the effect of our work. So my final point, how to understand place. So massively in exact science, everyone's making it up. There's no rules. This has only been going for about 10 or 15 years. Everyone is still just trying. Doesn't matter where you look in the world. Some people are more advanced than others, but pretty much everyone's trying to get involved in this placemaking space, and everyone's just doing their own thing. There's this metric and that metric, and none of them are proven to actually be accurate. So that's a real inviting space for young planning professionals, that there's still a lot of room in the planning profession to really to make your mark. So one of this idea, and this is sharing a new tool that I've been using. So I'm sure everyone is or will be familiar with the triple bottom line, especially thinking about sustainability of the economic, environmental, and social. I find this a really challenging space, that I don't like how siloed each of these triple bottom lines are, and how easy it is to forfeit, say, something like environmental for the sake of economic. So what I use, and I'm actively using this at the moment, especially around scooters, the e-scooters down here in Tasmania, is a different dimension to these three things. So if we look at like a direct parallel down, we can understand economic is exchange, environmental is environmental impact, and social and equity. But what I prefer about this, these three things of exchange, impact, and equity, is we can start to use our triple bottom line to start talking about what is the economic exchange when we're doing our placemaking. What's the environmental exchange? What are we giving back to the environment for something that we've taken? Or what is the environment given us, and what are we going to do to give something back? And then the social exchange, which is people talking, making new friends. And we can continue this across all of the three different spectrums. So what's the economic impact? What's the effect on the economic system? Have we brought new businesses to the front? Are we supporting micro business? Have we impacted the environment? How have we impacted the social? Like, have we brought more people with disabilities to this space to enjoy this space? And then thinking along those same things, economic equity, right? Has all the money gone to a multinational corporation, or has there been a fairly generous balance between local businesses and multinational? You know, did the environment lose from this? Did the country gain something? And then, of course, social equity, which is, you know, did we appeal to people from different socioeconomic backgrounds? Were people with like in a wheelchair or a mobility device able to fully enjoy what we had to do? So that's what I prefer about this next level of thinking, is we got to really understand that everything we're doing is having an impact, or is having an effect some way on our social, environmental, and economic. So I'd be really interested, especially through a follow-up with Barnaby, what people think about this idea, and how they relate it to what they've already learned about place, what their intuition says, or if they have any critiques or things that it's an oversight. I'd be really interested to hear. So that's the end of my preso. So the word I try and use a lot in the placemaking space is value. Value is the key word of understanding the effect of our work. Value can mean so many different things, and generally doesn't matter what kind of ideology you sit from, what position you want to take as a professional or as a community member. Generally, everyone wants to increase the value of what of their place, of their space, of their city, of their community, of their neighborhood. Yeah. So and just my final thing is, yeah, just get out on the ground. Like, don't sit behind a desk to try and understand place. Be there, feel it, experience it from different points of view in your own mind. Sometimes I like to drink some beers and go to somewhere and look at it from while my mind's ticking over different conversations. Just letting myself experience things through different ways, looking, imagining, and then take that back to your desk. Then you start applying those ideas to the paper or to your map or from your bird's eye view. So yeah, so that's the end of my presentation. Thank you. So Barnes, you got any questions, mate?
Yeah, definitely, man. Great presentation, by the way. Some really
Thanks.
interesting perspectives on place, maybe more like the philosophy behind it, which I think is really important for this. Like, as you said, it's not like a hard discipline. We don't have like a toolbox essentially that we're given on how to make place or activate. So it's sort of more of almost like a thought process that you then try and take out to the street to test something out. So really cool stuff there.
Thanks.
Just got a few things. I got a few little points off the presentation, but then also some maybe more general kind of questions about place activation, especially in relation to local economic development.
Yeah, sure.
So you mentioned transport planning as one of your key like initiatives.
Yeah.
But that transport planning kind of has there's like a traditional way that's understood, particularly roads and like mass movement of vehicles. So for you, what does transport planning mean in relation to placemaking and place activation?
Yeah, so the thing that good places need first and foremost is people. Without the people wanting to be there, without that magnetic pull for people to want to be there, it's just like an empty void space. And that's what I see as the evolution from traditional transport planning into 21st century contemporary transport planning is how to move people and to recognize that when someone's moving, they're not spending. And when someone's in a car, there's no exchange with their community or their neighborhood. And going back to my slide, that exchange is an aspect of all of those different things, that we really want people to be stopping regularly so that they are exchanging something. And often the exchange doesn't even need to be like people talking to each other or handing something over. It can be just sharing a smile with someone going down the street. I know I try and do it when I'm riding my bike. It's just look really cool when I'm doing that. And finding that adds, and people, give you a glance because you're wearing all nice clothes and stuff on your cool bike. And then they smile as you ride past, and that right there is an exchange, maybe a creative exchange, or makes people think that this place is cool or fun or edgy or interesting or diverse. And that's going to plant a seed in their mind that say here in Hobart, that this is a cool, edgy place and I want to come back. I want to explore this place more. I know that there's more going on here. But then, of course, really everything should revolve back to creating quality pedestrian experiences. Pedestrians should always be at the top of a transport pyramid, because a pedestrian is contributing so much to their town, whether it be through, you know, walking down the street and saying good day to their neighbor, walking, appreciating the architecture, taking some photos, whatever, stopping at the local cafe and shops on the way back. There's so much exchange that happens through just walking down the street, even if it's subtle or passive or whatever. And then continuing down that hierarchy, that's the real benefit of e-scooters and micromobility and bike riding is it's easy to get off that thing and become a pedestrian. And once you become a pedestrian, then you begin to exchange more. And so, yeah, so that's that real intersection. And the more that we think about place, we recognize that quality places make people want to walk there, right? We could go through a walk through, I don't know, Gwelup or whatever up in the north, over there in Perth, new suburban development, and it's just like sun-baked, hyper exposed, low quality architecture, and empty footpaths, which is just not surprising as compared to, say, somewhere like Leederville, which has, you know, well-established street trees and jacarandas and beautiful grassy verges and kids like playing in their driveways. So that's the environment that people will choose to walk in, where they'll say, oh, let's just walk because it's just like pretty nice and convenient and safe and fun, and stimulating. And then that's where people start walking. So that's one of the taglines for FutureCommon is, like the elevator pitch is making beautiful places for people to walk. And that relationship is super, super important. And that's my big criticism of how we're talking about bicycle transport infrastructure is it's just put it alongside the highway. We got the road reserve, so it'll be sweet. But there's so little place value in that space that only your dedicated cyclists want to ride there. You're not going to get your suburban trips. You're not going to have your mum wanting to go with her kids. They want somewhere really nice where the kid can kind of meander over the road, and there's like bugs flying everywhere, and you know, there's other kids like on their skateboards or something. You know, that's what makes that kid want to go for a ride, not because it you know, took 2 minutes off the commute or something, right? So that's the relationship between transport and place, and it's super important, and it's massively under discussed. And you almost find no place professionals talking about transport and no transport professionals talking about place. And it's a massive oversight.
Yeah, huge. And even just from my personal experience, like I know, let's say I go down to the strip, like I'm going to the gym or something, if I walk, almost guaranteed to stop at like a cafe or a shop on the way.
Yep.
And if I ride, maybe like a little bit less chance, but if I drive, there's just no way. You know, I just zip straight there, and you don't even see anything.
Yeah, you don't even see another human. Like no human looks you in the eyes along the way. Very weird. Yeah, exactly. And even just like, let's say beyond sort of like the high street or like places in like maybe a defined plaza or somewhere where you're trying to activate it, even just going for a bike ride like through suburbia, you just like see people see you, and you kind of get a better experience of the suburb. You're slightly slower than a car, but you're higher up than a car, so you can actually see what's going on. You actually get a greater experience of that place. Yeah.
Okay, cool. So you mentioned the outdoor dining aspect of this new role that you've been given.
Yep.
So what kind of impacts do you think that a quality outdoor dining plan, or lack of, depending on the situation, what kind of impacts that can have, not only for the local business that's practicing that, but also the surrounding area?
Yeah, so So I did my thesis in a similar kind of space to this, but I did mine on public performance as compared to economic areas. And through that came the one of my favorite Jane Jacobs quotes, which is, a city is judged by its sidewalks.
Yeah. Nice.
That it doesn't matter what is going on inside a building. That's not what you're looking for when you're choosing places to go around the world for your holidays or whatever. You're looking for places that, as a visitor, not really knowing all the secret spots or anything, that you're just like, whoa, that's cool. Oh, I want to go to that place. I want to go to that place. Oh, look at that cool thing happening over there. Oh, we should get a drink here on the street, you know, or yeah. So there's that fundamental thing that when someone's judging their experience of a city, they're judging it by the public space. You know, I was in Tokyo and there was like crazy stuff happening in the buildings. Like on the 7th floor, there was this like amazing record shop. But you never would know that, right? And it's cool to have some local insight to that kind of thing. But when you're in Japan, when you're in Tokyo, like there's like hundreds of things happening above and below you at all times. But what you're judging is what you're experiencing right here and now. And so relating this back to the outdoor dining is that's the real value of bringing commerce out into the streets, into the public space, is people begin, a visitor in particular, but most locals are visitors to their cities, essentially.
In some sense, yeah.
And often, right? And so you want people to walk through and be like, oh, that's cool. Like, oh, there's all these like young people there. I'm an old person, so I don't want to go to that place because that's not my vibe. But just down the road, there's a place that's a bit more sophisticated. People are drinking wine. That's my mood right now. That's where I fit. So I'll go into that place. So it's actually,
it's almost like expanding you're almost sort of expanding like the brand or the vibe outwards, so people can get a feel for the venue before choosing it.
Yeah, exactly. And you know, there's this old adage that comes through cafes in particular, that there's this bizarre human instinct, and I kind of related it in one of my earlier slides, but I didn't really talk about it, is this idea that we follow the herd. You know, humans are essentially sheep with, you know, more thoughts. But there's this thing that happens in cafes that people will usually, when they walk into a cafe to find a place to sit, they'll choose to sit at the place that's got all the empty cups and plates and stuff and napkins, rather than the clean table that's right next to it, right? So humans are attracted to places that other humans are or have been. And so I think that is a continuation of that idea of the outdoor dining, is when we see a place that's got people sitting out and enjoying themselves, you'll be like, oh, I want to go in there too. You know, the herd is in there. So I'm going to follow the herd. As compared to a blank glass shop front, which has got all this nice stuff inside, but it's just so easy to walk past it. And once you walk past it, everyone else is going to walk past it. Yeah. So it's that idea of just letting things show that humans exist here in this area, this space, this zone, this place, so that we can begin to lure people to stay longer, to go into places they haven't been before, to try new things, to feel like they're part of the story of the city, even if it's just for that hour or the day or whatever. There's a real pleasure in sitting in a quality outdoor space, having a nice drink and just watching the world go by. And that goes back to this idea of exchange and impact and those kind of things.
Yeah, awesome.
So that might be quite useful. Just give me one sec. Sorry, I'm just gotta
easy.
Put my computer on charge. Yeah, sorry, mate. Go on.
No, all good. I think that might be really useful for a lot of the students who are doing the enterprise project on sort of venues, whether a cafe or a bar or something. So those kinds of ideas will really really land.
Yeah.
Cool.
As you said, is really thinking of the brand, like how the brand projects out, because people love brands and they want to find the brand that meets them. So that's what I'd really encourage the students doing that project to do, is like, what is this business's brand? How could it come outside? And what would the impact be of that brand coming out?
Yeah. You mentioned this, it's not really a question, but like disrupting that status quo of a place, and like you challenge, I guess, the ideas about a place. And it's sort of something we've been learning about, is that place is always changing.
Yeah.
It's going to change no matter what. There's just too many forces shifting that. Mm-hmm. And so I think by kind of having a purposeful disruption of that, you can maybe select the changes that you want, as opposed to, hands off, just letting it do its thing. And, who knows what will happen. It's like, if you sort of selectively disrupt this thing, or you challenge this kind of status quo, you can actually you can kind of shape that change into a way that's going to best serve the place in the community. Yeah. And I guess that kind of ties back to something else we'll look at in the lecture, and also that you mentioned is, and it's a quote from, Project for Public Spaces, that New York-based outfit, is that great places depend on management. As you said, you've got to have that couple of years of just continual inputs. You need to have monitoring of what's going on there. You need to constantly be sort of trying to shape that place and pay attention to it. You need to be managing it for that to work. You can't just have this $4 million streetscape and just expect the built environment to, autonomously generate sense of place, identity, and vitality.
Place. Yeah,
And,
definitely.
we had a good presentation from Dean Cracknell, town teams guy. He's also in Hobart actually at the moment.
He's in Launceston, but
Launceston, and he had this great point of sort of the hardware and the software of place. Too often people will just invest in that hardware and then forget about the software, but the software is actually what gives a place life.
Yeah, it's a great analogy.
So sort of maybe just moving into some of your experiences. What do you reckon the best like, you've sort of mentioned this, how so much money goes into these hardware interventions. What do you think the best bang for your buck place activation that you've personally led has been? What's the best outcome you got for the least amount of money?
So there's two. So the first major project I did was in Fremantle in High Street, and we called it the West End Weekender, which was a 3-day street festival where we closed the road. We got all the businesses, or a lot of the businesses, to set up marquees in the middle of the road and sell their wares. We brought in some food vendors. We brought in lots of public art, and in particular, interactive public art where people could actually do it themselves. So we used a lot of origami, and previously in my slide presentation, we had the buffalo frame that was being wrapped with wool. So over the 3 days, it just kept getting wrapped and wrapped and wrapped. So it grew a skin as the festival went on. Really, really powerful event. So we managed to pull that off with a budget of $3,500, which is probably like maybe 100 times less than what it probably should have. But that was a real testament to finding the value of your existing business and of your creative and your micro business community.
Yeah.
So awesome. those three zones, your established businesses, your creative community, and your micro business, entrepreneurial little food stalls, those kind of things. People selling jewelry, that kind of stuff. They are your key placemaking assets, because they're the ones who are going to bring in their energy, bring their vitality, bring their ideas, and be able to generate their own value from the experience, rather than having to bring in a stage and paying all the performers and that more traditional style of public event. So for $3,500, what we created was just amazing. Obviously, we made bugger all money ourselves, but we created something, and it's still something I'm extremely proud of, that in 2022, the West End Weekender continues. So it got picked
Nice.
up by the Fremantle Business Improvement District and the local traders as being just a good idea, and something that didn't need a lot of resources to pull off, generated a lot of value, was a real highlight of their year. So that was 9 years ago.
And you guys just threw it that once, and then they picked it up and have done it ever since.
Exactly.
Yeah, excellent.
And so, as you were alluding to earlier around management, management is crucial, but it's not always the placemaker's job to manage it. It's not always the local government's job to manage it. As we demonstrated with West End Weekender, is you engage your local businesses and to help them find the value of doing placemaking. You bring down their barriers, whether they be psychological, maybe just a few resources. Like for the West End Weekender, we had bunting that went down the street, and they kept that. And then, they've got their local trading group, which is like an organized thing. And then they take it up. So they take over the management. So local government maybe chucks in a few $1,000 just to keep the wheels greased for it. But overall, it's a local business-led initiative, which means that it will inherently be sustainable, because even if the person who was leading it last year or pre-COVID, for example, someone else will be like, oh yeah, I could do that. Like all the pieces are already in place. We already know what we're doing. We'll just do it again because it's a great opportunity to bring more people down our street.
So maybe more important than ongoing management is a management plan that can be taken up by someone.
Yeah, ongoing managers.
Yeah, sure.
Is maybe a way of looking at it. Like, and the less formal that appears, probably the better. Where not everything's written into constitutions and those kind of things, where it's just constant proving that this is good for business. Generally, it comes down to business. So therefore, we'll do it. It's a good idea. We've got everything we need to do it, so we'll just do it. We've got everything lined up, ready to go. So that's really what the placemaker is trying to do. And we took on, like I said, with the duality, like we had really concerned people when we tried to host that. They were worried that no one ever makes money when a festival happens because everyone just wants to buy beers or whatever, beers and food. So rather we worked really closely with them, and we really made sure we brought them out into the festival, rather than thinking a festival is going to happen so people will go into your shop. It just doesn't happen. To get the benefit from a big public gathering, you have to go to it. You have to show that you are part of it. You can't just sit back and think that it's going to happen for you. That was the narrative that we wanted to introduce into that community, and through our effort, we brought down the barriers. Like we organized the traffic management, we organized everyone to be in the right place at the right time. We got everyone excited about what it was, and we created the social media assets for them to share. We negotiated it through council. So we just brought down those barriers so that they had a clearer and cleaner run to continuing the management, the growth, the complexity, all that kind of stuff.
Great. I remember that festival. I was there making juice.
Great juice.
Okay, so, great juice. Maybe go something a bit more specific to like what the students might be looking at. Would you say that there's like a single skill or skill set for a planner to become a really great placemaker and place activator? Do you know what I mean? Like what's something that they should try and unlock or hone to really nail that space?
Yeah. So from what I've experienced is, and I think the advantage of the planning degree is you got to learn to love complexity. And it almost puts placemaking at odds with every other industry and discipline, is sort of going back to that garden analogy, is the more complex the garden, the more resilient the garden is, the more beautiful, the more stimulating the garden is. So this is where planners and engineers often butt heads, especially in transport and built environment stuff, is engineers are drilled in to simplify, remove variables, right? We don't have undulating land when we're building our house. We bulldoze it, bring in a bunch of sand that we know the compression strength of, and then we build our house or whatever it is on top of that. So that engineering process is trying to simplify the forces. Whereas a placemaker, we try and add more complexity. The more realms of understanding that we can appreciate, whether that be sustainability, universal access and disability, economic development, development, like building buildings and stuff, engineering, the creative industry and arts, the more that we can bring into any initiative, even if it's a small initiative, if we can bring more and more stakeholders in, trying to get more and more value out of the idea, that's when you discover something amazing and special and unique and probably more sustainable, because you've got more people invested into it. So you've got more eyes looking at it or looking over it. You've got more people sharing it. You've just got more going on, and more going on means you're going to get more diverse audiences. You're going to appeal to different people in different ways. And I think that that's what the planning degree really sets young professionals up for, is you're taught that, you can't just look at your site. You have to look at all the networks going through it. You have to look at all the connections. You have to do your socioeconomic analysis. You have to do your accessibility to public space and employment and all that kind of stuff, to help you make your decision about the structure or the density or the whatever you're looking at. So planners are actually trained in complexity and trained to negotiate complexity. But then that doesn't, like in the traditional planning way, that doesn't always translate onto a ground level. And in a place specific way. So, you might be like, oh, we've got a footpath here, which suits everything else that I was considering. But as the place professional, you say, this footpath is underperforming because it's not wide enough. It's boring. Like, there's too much clutter. There's too many poles and parking machines and just random shit in the way.
And not enough people. The curbs are hostile. It's all been pulled up to put services in, so it has no aesthetic appeal. And so yeah, sure. Like, as the planner, we said, yeah, this is an important pedestrian link. But as the place professional, you say, we haven't made this space complex enough. We haven't made it a great place. So therefore, it's not doing everything it needs to do. And it's that next level of attention that planners need to begin to evolve into, or at least be able to respect that it's really important, and then to bring in the right people to support their initiative or their program development, whatever they're doing. It's almost, I think it's like a permaculture principle, like everything should serve more than one function. Yeah, and it's not just a footpath to move the occasional pedestrian through. We could have some biodiversity there. We could have some activity. That restaurant could have a few seats out there. It's fulfilling so many different roles. Yeah, as opposed to just being like a concreted way for people to walk from one place to another.
Exactly. And it's a really great way of thinking about place. Is like, how could I make this more complex?
And I guess with complexity, as you mentioned, you need get more stakeholders in, try and involve as many people. If you sort of, let's say there's some plaza somewhere and you think about how can I make this more complex, that could be as simple as, so I think it's important to note complexity doesn't have to be complex. It can be simple. You just need more stuff. You need more stuff going on.
Yeah.
And so it could just be these businesses, how can we get them out into this plaza? And you've immediately got 6 or 7 different actors doing different things, making that place 20 times more complex. And all you've done is say, hey guys, come out into the plaza.
Exactly. And that's not a huge amount more work for you as the professional or the administrator or whatever role you sit, or placemaker or whatever. It requires more conversations and meetings and negotiation and listening and understanding and all those things. But ultimately the delivery, you're right, should be simple. Like it should come across as simple, but have all this hidden complexity behind it.
Yeah. All right, man. That was great.
Beautiful.
I think we're pretty good for time, hey?
Yeah, I think we've probably just hit an hour or something. So I think that's probably enough.
Perfect. Great stuff. Really cool to see businesses doing well and you're developing those ideas. And we can tee something up if the students have questions. Either I'll give them FutureCommon email, or you can even tee up a Zoom or something if they want. But I'll get in touch with you about that.
Yeah, and especially for those students that you said were doing that economic development case.
Yeah, it's all planning.
Yeah, happy to come in as a mentor for that and just help people flesh out their ideas or talk about or understand how they could make it more complex or more interesting or more impactful or whatever.
That's great, man. I'll share your contact details then. Yeah, thanks heaps for that. That was an awesome presentation. Really sort of covered some interesting stuff that we haven't looked at before. And hopefully there's a bit of sort of inspiration there for, I guess, this planning is changing, it's like a whole new industry now. It's almost probably the most exciting time to be studying planning.
Absolutely.
In terms of what you can do with that, the fun that you can have with it, the impact you can have. So yeah, it's great to sort of bring that. So cheers, man.
Nice one. Thank you, Barnaby. Thank you, everyone at Curtin.
Alrighty.
Do your homework.
All right, man. I'll see you in a few months.
Nice one. All right. See ya.
Catch up.